In the bloody chronicles of Roman imperial history, few tales reveal the horrifying depths of cruelty and boundless power as vividly as the story of Sporus, a beautiful young boy whose tragic fate became entwined with one of history's most infamous tyrants, Emperor Nero. This is not merely a tale of politics or conquest. It is a harrowing exploration of how absolute power can erase identity, turning life itself into a grotesque theater of imperial obsession. It was the year 65 AD. The Roman Empire stretched across continents, its banners fluttering from the wild shores of Britain to the distant banks of the Euphrates. Rome stood as master of the world, its might seemingly limitless under the rule of Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. But behind the glittering facade of marble and gold, a sinister darkness began to grow, one that would soon consume an innocent life. Nero, still in his early 20s, had already shocked Rome with his debauched lifestyle, scandalous stage performances, grandiose building projects, and violent outbursts. Rumors of the emperor's growing instability spread through the streets like smoke. At the center of Nero's world loomed his magnificent palace, the Domus Aurea, the Golden House, a monument to his boundless ego. Yet even within these gilded halls, an unspeakable madness was about to unfold. Among the many members of the imperial court was a young freedman named Sporus. Though legally free, Sporus had no real protection. He lived in the shadow of an emperor whose whims were law and whose passions were lethal. Historical sources describe Sporus as almost otherworldly in beauty, delicate, graceful, possessing an ethereal charm that set him apart even among the pampered elite. But in Rome, beauty could be dangerous, and for Sporus, it became a curse. The catalyst for tragedy was the death of Nero's second wife, Poppaea Sabina. Some claimed Nero killed her in a fit of rage, kicking her while she was pregnant. Others blamed complications during childbirth. Whatever the cause, Poppaea's sudden death plunged Nero into a spiral of grief that quickly turned into a dangerous obsession. And then, Nero saw Sporus. Whether by coincidence or cruel fate, the emperor was struck by the uncanny resemblance to his late wife. In Sporus's gentle features, Nero saw the ghost of Poppaea and conceived a twisted plan. If death had taken his beloved, he would recreate her at any cost. Nero ordered Sporus to be castrated. This was not merely physical mutilation. It was a brutal erasure of the boy's identity. Sporus was stripped of manhood, future, and dignity, all to satisfy the emperor's perverse grief. Behind palace walls, among cold marble, imperial physicians carried out the procedure. Sporus' screams, if there were any, were drowned out by indifference and luxury. But this was only the beginning. Nero announced to the empire that he would marry Sporus. Publicly presenting him as the embodiment of Poppaea, he named him Sabina and unveiled him before Rome as his new bride. The wedding became a macabre spectacle, with all the pomp and ceremony of an imperial marriage. Sporus, now dressed in lavish female garments, underwent the rituals of Roman matrimony, while the court stood in horrified silence. The Senate, aristocracy, and foreign envoys watched as Nero declared his devotion to a living doll. And what followed was perhaps even more disturbing. Always under the gaze of Rome, which watched in silent revulsion. Roman citizens, long accustomed to the eccentricities of emperors, were deeply shaken by the spectacle. They saw through the illusion. Beneath the glittering garments and jewels was not the image of Poppaea, but a mutilated boy, his body bearing thin, haunting traces of surgical violence. To preserve the illusion, Sporus had to act entirely as a woman, walk, speak, behave exactly as Nero demanded. Any mistake, the slightest deviation from Poppée's image, could provoke the emperor's furious wrath. And yet, at times, Nero showered Sporus with gifts and affection, creating a destructive cycle of reward and punishment. Behind the public spectacle lay a private prison of unbearable psychological torment. Sporus wasn't merely pretending to be someone else, he was forced to become someone else. Every facet of his identity was systematically erased and replaced with an obsessive image crafted by Nero. It was a kidnapping of the self on a terrifying scale, not of name, not of title, but of existence itself. And while Sporus endured this cruel existence, the empire around him began to crumble. Nero's rule grew increasingly erratic. The Senate, military commanders, and even his personal guard began to turn against him. By the year 68 AD, uprisings had erupted across the empire. Faced with universal rejection, Nero fled Rome with a handful of loyal followers. Among them was Sporus, a youth who had never chosen a single step of this nightmare, now fleeing with his tormentor as the empire collapsed. Nero's final days were filled with delusional fantasies and desperate schemes, but ultimately, cornered and betrayed, he chose suicide over capture. Even death did not free Sporus. After Nero's suicide, Sporus was not granted liberty. He became a grim trophy, passed from one powerful man to another in the chaos of the year of the 4 emperors. First, he was taken in by Emperor Galba. Sporus lived in luxurious captivity, still partially performing the imposed role. Then he came under the care of Otho, who, according to some accounts, treated him with a degree of gentleness. But Otho's reign was brief, and soon Vitellius seized power. And so began the final, most humiliating chapter of Sporus's life. Vitellius conceived a public spectacle so obscene that even Rome, with all its depravity, recoiled. He planned to force Sporus into the arena to reenact the rape of Persephone, a theatrical act of sexual violence meant to entertain the crowd. After years of mutilation, forced erasure of identity, and psychological torture, Sporus now faced the prospect of ultimate degradation, being publicly defiled before thousands of cheering spectators. And then, in the face of this final horror, Sporus made his last, desperate choice. He took his own life. In death, Sporus reclaimed what had been stolen from him throughout his life, the right to choose his fate. His suicide became a quiet, tragic act of resistance against a world that had stolen his body, his identity, and his soul. Rome barely mourned his passing. To the empire, he was little more than a footnote in Nero's legacy, a broken doll discarded when it ceased to entertain.